So before I get started, let's do a little bit of an intro. Mark Szarka, sit in our AI strategy practice. I wear a bunch of different hats for the firm. So prior life was in M&A, value creation, private equity, but also a CS degree. Ended up then leaning into how could I help our tech clients create native AI products, as well as software clients starting to actually embed AI into their products, as well as help lead our inference optimization strategy practice. So if you want to run things in the edge, devices, cloud, whether it's the small language models or the various data science techniques like distillation, pruning, et cetera, how do you do that effectively? And then lastly, the thing that I find myself to be the most passionate about is changing the way that Deloitte works. So imagine we do things like strategy, M&A, implementing SAP, Oracle, et cetera. How do you actually do that in a way that you have a high degree of confidence in, which is our core product? If you think about that as a longest scale, long horizon task, how can you actually start to do that? So some of the things that we've observed and actually can see is that it does work. It works really well. Some of the things that even haven't come out yet of architectures, we know that it does work, but it did take a lot of bumps and bruises to get along the way to figure out, well, what are the patterns that are required? What's the infrastructure? What's the data that's required? Do I need to lean on an LLM all that much, or should I decompose it with more sort of scaffolding to actually make this work at scale? So we have a State of GenAI survey that we run every year. It's about 2,800 executives who give us, sort of trade data for sort of insights to see how they're trending across sort of getting value out of AI. If you can see on the left-hand side, that's a bit of, it does confirm that businesses are continuing to opt to continue increasing their investments into AI. And that's driven by a few things such as productivity. So can I do that same unit of work more efficiently? This is a theme that everyone seems to be talking about. But then you can also start to think about that as I can do a higher volume of things. Am I going to be able to do more with the same amount of headcount? Am I going to be able to do more and grow and break through that productivity paradox? Second part is, well, if I'm going to start freeing up time and mind share to, instead of doing some of the administrative work, can I do things that are more novel? Or if I start to build or implement or consume or buy third-party tools, that allows me to do things that are more novel. So can I do things like drug discovery? Can I do things like material, finding new materials? Or can I just come up with new paths to market? So thinking about like, what is it going to be able to drive for me on the revenue side of things that I couldn't do before to take more market share? And then lastly, is just increased benefit of the relationship with customers. So still working towards the hyper-personalization that everyone's going after, but there's that side. Now, on the right-hand side, so everyone a fair number raised their hands of coming into sort of blockers with scaling. Well, a lot of that is just driven by, there could be a few things there, and we'll talk about some of the drivers of why that is, of 70% of organizations only seeing 30% of use cases coming to production. Now, a lot of those drivers could be tied to, and we can counter some of those things as well early on, is if you saw ChatGPT come out on November 30th, 2022, you got very excited. You started saying like, well, we should go build a bunch of things. Not everyone knew what a vector store was. Not everyone knew how you might use graph. Not everyone knew how do you start to use, what is an embedding, right? So that's like new things for most people in organizations. They're starting to understand, well, what does that look like? Now, that could be a case of organizations building 100 of the same thing, blooming flowers of same design. How do you then start to squash those down? And you start to figure out like, okay, maybe I'll need one of those. I need the best of those to start to consolidate. And we'll probably start to see a number of that go higher of more use cases coming to production. One, just because there was just so many things popping up, but also other things like, did you have the right person in the room to make the decision? Did they start to say, well, am I gonna have an LLM try to do everything? All of these things tied to talent, tied to data, infrastructure, who's making the decisions, right? So this is sort of the sort of putting the right practices in place, but also thinking about who should be running organizations, who should be making decisions, a lot of that. Now, it was also interesting as part of this survey. So from left, actually, one more thing, I'll go back. On that right-hand side of the page, there's also an interesting cut of the survey that also shows, and should have put it on here, but that same set of organizations would have said, if you took the cut of people, of organizations that had a higher confidence in their talent that know what to do with AI, or how to implement AI, or how to roll out AI, or have effectively sort of put one or two in a box, right? So your business leader, your tech leader together, has a higher degree of success of getting more production use cases out because they can make the decisions right, allocate budget effectively, not be scared, and not be timid to say, like, oh, actually, you know what, maybe we should just be buying more commoditized use case, and like let's invest our resources in more things that are novel to us, and we'll keep a competitive differentiation. So that you can find, you'll find that changes as you have a higher confidence in your talent. Now, the things that are holding back the organizations, I know this is, if we go from right to left, I mean, talent is the most rate limiting factor. So this survey talks about, well, where do you have the highest degree of confidence? On the right-hand side of the screen, talent is the lowest. But rather than starting with talent, a lot of the things we start to do is in terms of designing an operating model for organizations now. So a lot of the work is, what are the AI COE, so Center of Excellence? How do I change my operating models in organizations? So what should I be doing to realign talent? How should I realign, sort of how, is it a shared service? Do I have a dedicated product org? Now it's also tied into, should I have an AI strategy or should I have a strategy? You should actually just starting to pull things together of saying it's pulling together one, they should be one and the same. It shouldn't be sort of disparate pieces of work. It should be, well, if I want to grow X% over the next number of years, how am I going to do that with the same amount of headcount? How am I going to grow at that rate that I want to? What's required from an AI perspective? Those two things should be one and the same. And that starts to drive a lot of the rigor and the processes that then start to follow it of, if this is my net new competitive advantage, how do I then start to govern it? How do I start to make sure those processes are rolled out? Build buy decisions. It's about basically, anything you would expect from a business school education of how do I manage return on invested capital in an effective manner for AI. A couple of other things are talent, right? One of my teams, the products I own, oversee a series of PhDs. We're building really, really interesting things. Not everyone has access to that. Some do, but it's in some pockets. But you could go, what we actually start to find is you go to clients where the teams that are building really interesting things aren't getting the right microphone. They don't know that that the leadership in the organization doesn't actually know that those teams are actually building novel concepts, even if they're on nights and weekends. It's about finding that right talent and giving them the microphone to say, well, I will have this aspiration to go and change the way that we increase margin, or how do we do hyper-personalization on a channel perspective, or how do I then start to promote and bring up the right talent to make those decisions, or hiring in. Right, so talent ends up being the most critical out of all of this. And technology and data management, both super important. The boring sort of data readiness type of work is still ultra critical, bringing the data to the models, and then also understanding that there's still the talent difference also impacts. Some people don't still understand what structured data versus unstructured data, sort of why do I need a graph? How do you manage all of this? Should I rely, what is a re-ranker, and all those different things of like actually building these things in production, or how do I set myself up to successfully choose a platform to build on? Should I build it on the cloud? Should I get my own private cloud? How do I make this all work? And these are all the sort of things that come together to impact organizations actually scaling, right? So it's great that these novel inventions are coming out, and I think that's a competitive advantage for companies that are also starting net new, right? So how do you start to come to bear, start bringing your AI strategy together with your strategy to drive all this down throughout the rest of the organization? And then the last thing is the technology infrastructure too, is tying that into how you budget, right? So the future systems of the workforce of the future will work, and things that are being built in the market, things that we're building, things that others are building, they're not going to be, I'm going to get the response back in 5 seconds. And we've seen with other models that have come out, it could be that I'm taking my meetings, and then 2 hours later, I'm getting a workflow that took 2 weeks. It's compressed down to 90 minutes. It's within less than 1% of difference in the outcomes from before, right? So it's going to be about preparing having the infrastructure that can handle that, and budgeting for run times of whether you want to bring that down to your cluster, or if you want to actually be prepared to pay for the inferencing costs associated with that. Now, there's a lot of data on here. We won't drain the page, but something to think about is, so top row, expertise, right? And so if you'd say how many feel they have a high degree of confidence in their talent, relatively low, right? So that's pretty common across the board. And you can see a lot of these organizations have because of that, and they also see the market around them, and they see all these advancements, and there's lots of opportunity. How do I continue to increase investment? And then also, how do I feel about my scaling progress? Where a lot of these executives are confirming that we haven't moved beyond our scaling goals and objectives, and there's that tension between how do I deliver value, what does value look like, how do I think about things in an outcome basis versus, hey, here's $100, give me an output and give me a chatbot, right? So like things that people have moved beyond that to try to actually get to scale, and there's patterns that are out there now. Now when I talk about outcomes, so if our aspirations are to say, well, I want to apply this net new AI to something along the lines of customer segmentation or marketing strategy or market strategy, the outcome should not be limited by, well, I hope to get insights from my data faster. The insights to actually drive this at scale and get value out of it is going to be, well, can I fundamentally make that something that's commoditized? And how do I build trust in that where I'm not going to spend $100 on, or $1 million, whatever your unit of value is, on something that is going to get me 80% accuracy? How do you build it in a way that's effective to get me to a percentage of accuracy that's similar to what my employees do today, and then actually get that to be even better? Because it won't be, I'm going to give you an output in 3 weeks now. It's going to be, I'm going to give you an output in 90 minutes. Let's review it. Let's iteratively refine it. How can I also start to feed it more data sources? And you have to all think about that as the outcome is, if that is what my target goal is, you're not going to get there in 3 weeks of building, or 3 months of building. It's going to be something of, it's going to take me maybe 9 months to build. And then how many of those code snippets could be decomposable and shared across the organization to be made available for other net new use cases that are going to tie to longer horizon tasks of not just, can I do RAG better? Not can I do hybrid RAG better? Can I actually take actions? How do I think about monitoring, A/B testing my employees, right? So there's tools out there today. So if you're a software engineer and you have your engineering stack in your organization, there's clear ways to start to orchestrate sort of, in another word that's used a lot now, orchestrate sort of all the different endpoints and be able to see, well, what is my cohort of users who are using Copilot, cohort of user Copilot, GitHub Copilot, others that are using Cursor, insert other SDLC tool here. You can start to then baseline that against your other engineers who are using no tools. You can see the number of commits. You can see the number of bugs that they encounter, quality of their code. Now there's ways and techniques to be able to start to apply that to say, well, is this investment that I'm making in AI worthwhile? And if it is, you can then start to improve the confidence that you share out with the executives, with the boards of saying, we're going to double our investments because it's going to be a flywheel of continuous improvement for me as an organization. I can take share relative to my competitors, and whatever the mandate is from the organization. So these sort of benchmarks, and that's another word, is you have to make very custom benchmarks for each organization. Can't rely on MMLU, any of those other benchmarks types of things to say, well, should I be using that model? Should I be using this model? It's how do I implement my entire platform? How do I implement my LLM? Which data should I be using? And I can start to increase the confidence of, if making decisions of, should I use this endpoint from a third-party data vendor? Should I use another endpoint from a data vendor? And continuously monitoring both the observability of it, the quality of against my objectives, which can continue to improve my business case. Now, this strategy, sort of thinking about to address this, there's 13 main points. So again, we won't go through every circle, but sort of intentionally broke down the main components earlier into the 13 bubbles of, well, if we have this large survey, we have our experience of doing this for ourselves, we're doing this for our clients, we're seeing how we can actually drive scale. It starts with shaping the strategy as an organization, bringing everyone under the TP, not making it competitive internally. There's only so many resources that can go around. And there's also the biggest resource, just like If anyone likes the Acquired podcast, they always talk about some of the early days of the tech organizations. The most difficult and toughest resource that could go around is talent, time and energy and mind share, right? So if you know about this tech and you're in the organization, you're probably among the busiest back-to-back calls all day. I know I am all the time, every day with clients, our leaders as well, of just being able to say, well, we can't get a breath in, but we have to be able to figure out, like, how do we make sure that everyone understands what's going on, but also being able to then apply that to the rest of the organization. So don't make them competitive. Bring those people in, build effectively with those people to help shape and design the future of your organization. The boring stuff like risk, the boring stuff like governance, the boring stuff like overviews and PMOing, not overdoing it, but that stuff all is super important because, again, you need to be able to say, well, if I'm going to apply this across the organization and this entire large Excel that we've built, and maybe hopefully in the future a Python version based of it, of your business case, how do I make sure that every business unit is actually tracking against that? And you have to at least be able to, use the carrot and stick method a little bit to say, if I have certain targets and I have certain investment goals, how do I get that? And then lastly, it's the talent and data piece. I think that's pretty common threads. More of that, just are you on the right track to scaling? I don't think I have too much more to add here on the specifics of this, but I'm sure this is a lot of stuff that's been echoed in many of the other conversations. But thinking about what we're doing and what we're seeing, how we're advising our clients, it is here, it is real. It's really, really exciting. I get more excited every day to think about. Wake up and I love my job now of being able to think about, well, let's bring 2 use cases to production. Let's bring one client here, another client here. And you start to think about, like, well, what does that actually mean to say, let's get a bunch in production? Then you'll get into the next step of inferencing strategy, of runtime endpoints, which is the right model and all those sorts of things over time. And those will be sort of automated too, but it's all here and it's really, really exciting to talk about. Agents of, 2023 was the year of LLMs, 24 was the year of agents. Next year it's going to be memory. People are then going to start talking about cognitive science. So these are all patterns that really going to start unlocking the net new use cases. Last thing is three E's, because we're consultants, we love frameworks and patterns. So are you helping with efficiency? Are you helping with being effective? And then also, lastly, being exponential. So can I help with the sort of how quickly you're doing the work? Can you do things better, so higher quality? So that's a net new benchmark. And then also, if I have enough time, can I start to allocate the talent in more of my direct margin part of the business of how do you build the net new products? How do I take share from my competitors? How do I run this organization to be the most effective sort of entity as possible? It is true, though, it's interesting, the second bullet, a lot of the users who are now interested in, if you see that your organizations are starting to go from, oh, I'll take a POC, to actually understanding how this stuff works, they actually want to start playing with low-code tools. So you have things like Flowwise, like an open source version of that. There's lots of others out there. You can start drag and dropping endpoints, data, LLMs, data. You can get those things to actually, once you get to a point of having executives start to understand that, it's really, really exciting to be able to start applying that as a novel way to start considering sort of organizational fluency. And I think once everyone starts to be on board of like, oh, this is how this actually works. Because not everyone's going to understand what attention mechanisms are. Not everyone's going to understand, what are vector stores, all of that. And I think having this as like a good framework of indicators to start looking out for is a good way to start thinking about that, as well as applying the previous framework of how do you start to drive AI. So we have about 3 minutes left of the 25. I know it's late on the day, lots of content. Any questions, thoughts from anyone? If not, totally okay. Totally get it, appreciate it. Thank you all for coming in. And if there's any questions, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat more. And yeah, thank you for stopping by.